But I would say you may have some things to add to that. But I think it's figuring it out, who you are, who are you working for, what do you really want, and what do you need to do to get there.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we don't. We just kind of get on that treadmill and we just keep going. You know, we don't get off. We don't get off. We don't stop it. We don't pause it. We don't do those things where we can reassess. And am I really finding balance that I need to find?
It is not easy to strike a healthy balance of work, life, marriage, and family. And practically speaking, balance is hard to find and even harder to maintain. So in today's episode, Dr. Kim will share practical tips to help you find that balance. Now, if you've already mastered work-life balance, please go ahead and write us in and let us know how you did it, because it is seriously a work in progress for me. Is that same for you, Dr. Kim?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. So we're all in this together, but seriously, listing off all the things we have to balance is like kind of anxiety inducing. So Dr. Kim, what are some of the most common pain points you see individuals facing as they are mastering work-life balance?
I think it's a good question, because I think it can vary a little bit to the person in the job situation, but I think depending on your work, that time management thing is such a big important piece in that. How do we do our job well with the responsibilities we have there? What about our family? What about our time? What about the times we feel overwhelmed and stressed, and instead of taking time to really work on that, maybe we don't, and so then it affects our home life, and then we don't get enough exercise and sleep, and all those kind of things that if we just don't balance our time very well, they can be a problem, and they can be a problem. And if you continue to not get enough sleep, it affects us in big ways. So that's going to affect you at home. It affects you at work. And so for some people, it's kind of like on this treadmill they're on, and they can't figure out how to balance everything and to balance all that time. So I think that's one of the things. And I think too, you start a job. I had a couple one time I just think of, and they were, he was in starting a practice as a dental practice, and she was starting a nursing career, and they're both trying to do really well. And so you get this overwork, you get this burnout. Really, she's the one who really burned out. And so because there wasn't time for personal life, there wasn't time for taking care of yourself. And so I think that whole overwork thing can, depending on where you are, and where you're in a career, I think any of us can take something for a short period of time, but if it continues on and on, I think that's a pain point. I think it's an area that we've got to deal with. And then I think when I've talked to people, say, I know I need my family, but I want to do good at my work. And so you get this guilt, you feel pressure at family, you get feel pressure from work, and then you just kind of feel like I'm just caught in the middle of this. And so that's not healthy either. So those are three that came to my mind, of just not managing time well, burning out, just overwork, and not getting that balance there. And then this guilt of what should I be doing? And especially for a job that you really love, and you maybe love the company and the people you're working with and for. And so you don't want to let them down, but you don't let your family down. And so you feel torn.
Yeah. Oh gosh, absolutely. Yeah. All those, I mean, I feel like we could do an episode on each of those because they're all huge, and definitely there's a lot to flesh out there and how to work around those. So, so then bringing that, so that's individually. So I mean, I definitely relate with all that and understand those, but then when you bring it into a marriage, there's a little more going on there. So what are the pain points that come up between the couple in this issue?
Well, I think the time issue for sure, that, enough time for each other, for the family. You haven't been home to put the kids to bed with me in 3 weeks, things like that. Quality time for that bonding that a couple needs to continue. We know we can't just put our marriages on hold, and just enjoy each other. And so when there's not time for that, then I think you're going to start seeing problems in a marriage situation, and you're not going to feel as connected. You're not going to feel as close. Yeah. And so the time is that, then the communication, if you're not talking to each other, not just, logistics, which I think I've seen couples that get in pretty tough work-life balance situations that they function pretty well. The kids get to where they're supposed to go, and you get where you're supposed to go. But what about the needs that you've got? What about the expectations? What about the concerns? Are you taking time to talk about those things that really help you stay as a team and work together? And if you're not, then you're going to feel, I think, pull apart a little bit there too. And I think too that stress that we talk about that can come with work, and how do you handle that at home? Does that spill over into your personal life? And if it does, if I, one of the things someone taught me years ago that has been so helpful, and that is on my drive home from work every day, I pray and I leave everything from that day in God's hands. And then when the kids were home, I'd start thinking, okay, God, what does Nancy need when I get home? What about the kids? What do they need? And it really helped me in not bringing all that stuff that from my day, or something that just wasn't the concerns or things that didn't come out like I want them to bring those home. And so I think a lot of times we don't do that. We don't make that transition well. And so we come in and we're not really helping. We're coming in and we're just somewhere else, and all of a sudden we find ourselves fighting, or we don't take that time together that we need. And then I think when you've got couples that are both working, and I see a lot of families where it's like that, how are you going to do household chores? How are you going to do the responsibilities with the kids? And that's a tension if you don't talk about it and agree on, because you may have an expectation that your spouse is going to do this, this, and this. Well, if you haven't communicated about it and they don't do this, this, and this, then you're mad at them for not doing something you didn't even talk about them doing. And that just doesn't work out well at all. And then I think too, the financial pressure, have you set your, are your expenses higher than they need to be? Have you have you bought that house, that car, and did you buy it too soon, or those kind of things? You have debt, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh my gosh, my kids are more expensive than I thought they were. And we really like this private Christian school, and we really would like to take our kids there, but where's the money for that? So you get all of those things. So I think the things that I see with couples, the time is a huge thing.
Yeah.
Then when you don't communicate well, how are you handling that stress? What are you bringing home? How are you handling things at home with the roles that you play? And then the whole thing of finances, which covers so many issues in our marriage relationships, kind of is in all of this.
Yeah, for sure. That's a lot to delegate. And I think when you're struggling already with this balance, which a lot of us are, it's harder to handle it well.
Yes.
Because you've got so much tension and stress there already personally.
Yeah, and I think it depends, where are you in your work situation? Are you new in a company, and maybe you've been there a while, but now your responsibilities are more? I've seen that happen where you're in a company and everything's going great at home and work, and you get a promotion, and all of a sudden you didn't realize everything that came with that promotion.
Yeah.
And you're working for the same people, but all of a sudden your home life begins to suffer because of the demands of that position. And, I've had more than one person tell me, I wish I'd said no to that promotion. And so, and then you get in situations where somebody says, well, if I say no, they may never offer me anything again.
Right.
And so there's just a lot that goes on with it,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's interesting too, because if you are not functioning at your best as a person, you might be able to power through for a while. Probably, I would want to say easier at work than home, because home is just like your place to relax.
Right.
But at a certain point, it's going to catch up with you. Like you mentioned earlier, the burnout and all that stuff you can't stave that off forever.
It does. And you want to catch it before it gets to an extreme where you really are just going to kind of hardly function. And I've worked with people like that, that they let it go and go and go until they really got to the point they just couldn't hardly function. And that's not a good place to get.
No, absolutely not. Yeah. And so I'm wondering, we didn't have this in your list, but what would be like the first sign that you would need to go ahead and really rein some of this in? Because I'm thinking we're going to go into some practicals here. But if you're right on that cusp, how do you know, whoa, we've really got to handle this?
Well, listen to the people that are telling you're there. And I think sometimes we don't. We discount that. I think just taking time to look at yourself and to pray about it. God, where am I in this? And if you're not sleeping well, if you've got anxiety and that's harder, those things are going to eventually take a toll on you. What's your stress level and how do you handle the stress? All of us have stress.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some stress that's good stress. I think it helps motivate us and helps us do the things we need to do. But there's a lot of bad stress that really takes us down. And so,
Mm-hmm.
what is the stress? What's my pain point there? And so, I think just taking time to look at it. I've had people just talk about, I think Carrie Newhoff, who's a friend, does a great job of sharing when he went through burnout as
Mm-hmm.
a pastor, and just to really where he just couldn't do anything. My pastor, Craig Rochelle, went through a similar situation a few years ago. And it's so helpful when men like that, they're in those kind of
Mm-hmm.
positions, share with us and help us know that, whatever pedestal we may put some of people on, we're all human and
Mm-hmm.
nobody's Superman up there. And that
Mm-hmm.
we've got to, our bodies only function the way God made them to function. And so
Mm-hmm.
listen to your mind, listen to your body, listen to people who are telling you got to slow down, listen to your wife and kids that are saying, where are you?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
need to be home, because like you said, Lindsay, home is where we really do recharge, and we want
Mm-hmm.
that to be our refuge. And so
Mm-hmm.
if you're working, 9 miles an hour at work and
Yeah.
come home and you're still on that grind in your mind,
Mm-hmm.
you don't get recharged.
Yeah.
You got to get to where you're able to leave that at the door and come inside and be recharged and enjoy your family and your wife and your husband, and
Yeah.
then get ready to go out and fight again. But if we don't
Mm-hmm.
take that time, we just stay on this treadmill again.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And it's so important to have this conversation about ourselves as individuals, but also about the way we handle this as a team in marriage. Because even if, I come home and let it all go, but then I walk into tension and we have this constant stress because we don't maybe see eye to eye on things and we're not handling things well together, not communicating about it well. Maybe you have certain issues that you know that you're not really on the same page, but you don't want to bring it up because you don't want to step in it and make the whole thing blow up.
Right.
And so if you have that kind of underlying stress in your marriage, you're not really getting that enjoyment and that rest that you could be getting.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that's the way God designed it. I mean, when in Genesis, he took a day of rest. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If the creator of the world took a day of
Mm-hmm.
rest, the creator of everything, why in the world do we think we don't need rest?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like,
It's like, well, I'm not, I don't have any more power than God does. So let's let
no,
that go.
no, exactly.
Yeah. And I
Exactly.
think you're right. It's really, really hopeful and encouraging that there are more people speaking about this now. And I really appreciate that. One more thing this conversation reminds me of is the conversation you had with Gary Thomas about making your marriage a fortress. And
Mm,
he kind of talks about how, if you're not putting in the practices and in work to make your marriage be the place you want it to be right now, that's a fortress, then at some point you're going to face something together. And if your marriage
yes.
is not a safe and a warm place for you, it's really going to expose that. So I'll link that episode in the show notes just because it's really, in my mind, it's really connecting with that.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
there's
good.
a lot of good stuff there. So let's get into some of the practicalities about how to balance all these things. What are some of your practical guidelines to find that balance?
Well, I think you've got to begin to really do take that look and what's going on. Some of the
Mm-hmm.
things that really helped me was learning to say no.
Mm-hmm.
And there's things, and sometimes you can't say no to things in the workplace. Sometimes you can, but do I need to say no to other things? If I'm working pretty hard and things are stressed and I've got a meeting or something I'm committed to every single night of the week, where's the time for me, my
Mm-hmm.
wife, my
Mm-hmm.
family, rest, relaxation, hobbies, all those things that really are important in the big picture. And so I think for me, it was learning it was okay to say no. And it
Mm-hmm.
has always been hard for me to say no, because
Mm-hmm.
I am, I'm a people pleaser, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say yes to people. I want to be, if someone wants me to be something or do something or be on a committee or something like that, I feel like, well, they feel like I can do a job. So I need to say yes. And I had
Mm-hmm.
to say no, learn to say no. And I think
Mm-hmm.
one thing that my pastor said years ago that really hit me is when you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else. And I was saying
Mm-hmm.
no to my family a lot because I was
Mm-hmm.
saying yes to all these other things. And so I think that's an important thing, learning to balance that. Um, Technology, use it to your advantage, not
Mm-hmm.
for the negative part of that. You can use notifications, auto replies,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And so use it to, I use it one of the reminders I have on my phone is to send Nancy a text.
Mm-hmm.
And, um, that kind of lights up my day, and I think lights up her day. And she knows,
Mm-hmm.
she finally figured out it was a notification because everything came at 3:01. But she knows,
Yeah.
that wouldn't happen. But it's just the fact that I thought to put it on there, and I thought,
Mm-hmm.
and I followed through with it. That I
Mm-hmm.
think is what was meaningful for her to do
Mm-hmm.
that. Um, I think a lot of us too have people that have, learned to work from home, and how are we doing in that? And how do we,
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that I struggled with, I loved that time really in early COVID that we worked from home. I love being here and having lunch together and stuff like that. But I didn't know when my end time was. And
Mm-hmm.
so I would look up and I'd think, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's this late and I'm still
Mm-hmm.
here working on something. So I think if you've got that flexibility, you're working remote, things like that, you've got to have a
Mm-hmm.
stop time. I had a
Yeah.
lady that she had her office in her home, and she was having that same struggle, and so we put a deadbolt lock on that room. And at 5 o'clock, her alarm went off. She walked out of there and she turned the deadbolt, and then she didn't go back till the next morning. And it was just that
Wow.
little thing that it made her know that, okay, and I can't remember what we did with the key, but it was not going to be like it was right with her where she could just walk up
Yeah.
there and do it. She had to go get the key and things like that. So it made her
Mm-hmm.
stop and think. And just that discipline of stopping and thinking kept her
Mm-hmm.
from going back in there. And it made
That's so
such a
smart.
difference. So,
Yeah.
I think that's why I think each individual, what can you do? I think if you can
Hmm.
outsource some things, or there's some things that can you delegate,
Mm-hmm.
that was something. But there was a time with Awesome Marriage, it was me and
Mm-hmm.
and Nancy and my pastor kept saying,
Mm-hmm.
"You need help," and I thought,
Mm-hmm.
well, I don't have time to get help. All this stupid
Right.
answers that we can have. But having help, having you, having Christina, having Lynn's, having Mike and Heather, that our team, all of our
Mm-hmm.
team, not want to leave anybody out, but that really makes a difference and helps, and allowed me, because I was doing things that were not in my wheelhouse, but I had to
Mm-hmm.
do them because I was the only one there, and so being able to have other people that have
Mm-hmm.
gifts, so much more gifted than I am in those areas, has been a real blessing. And so I think learning, how do we do that? Can we enlighten
Mm-hmm.
that? And then I think too, you got to take care of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
If I didn't exercise consistently, take time to relax, I'm not going to be as good. Exercise helps me. It's a time for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's good for my body, but it's good for my mind and my soul. And a lot of times when I'm working on an elliptical, I'm reading the Bible, and
Mm-hmm.
not that I'm not trying to over spiritualize that, but I mean, I think
Mm-hmm.
you can use those times to really grow too.
Mm-hmm.
And so making sure you do enough of that kind of thing. Those are probably the main things, that
Mm-hmm.
I would say. You may have some things to add to that, but I think it's figuring it out, who you are, who are you working for, what
Mm-hmm.
do you really want, and what do you need to do to get there.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we don't. We just get on that treadmill and we just keep going.
Yeah.
We don't
Mm-hmm.
get off. We don't get off. We don't stop it. We don't pause it. We don't do those things
Mm-hmm.
where we can reassess. And am I really finding balance that I
Mm-hmm.
need to find?
Yeah. I think it's hard sometimes to step off the treadmill because being unbalanced can be glorified at times.
Mm,
Being busy can be glorified. And like we said earlier, I think that is kind of changing with some people speaking out about burnout and rest and healthy rhythms. But there's still very much a culture that glorifies overwork and burnout and hustle and being the first one awake and the last one to sleep and the first one in the office and last one to leave. And so it can be hard to step out of that because it feels important to be in that and it
yes.
feels productive. But there's nothing more productive than living in the way that Jesus designed you to live, because it's sort of like what we talk about when we talk about tithing. He can do more on your 90% that you
Mm-hmm.
have, that when you've given him 10 than you could ever do with your 100%. And I think when
Absolutely.
because we've both lived that, in our marriages with our spouses, we've seen that to be evident. And I think that this is that Sabbath principle of taking a day to not be productive is really important for our perspective, to remind us that we're just living out of what God's already given us. It's
Mm,
his time, his things. We're just stewarding it. And so kind of setting aside this need to feel important and productive and actually saying, whose mission am I really on? Is it just a mission for me, or am I really working with the creator in the way he created me to?
That's so good. Yeah, and I think so much of it where we live in the United States, those of us who are listening that are, our culture does that. Yeah, I can remember the first time Nancy and I went to Europe, and there was a restaurant we wanted to go to, and we got there, and the sign said closed for holiday 2 weeks. And I just think, how many restaurants here would close for 2 weeks? Probably not very many, if any. And then Tiffany, who does a lot of personal stuff for me and is on our team, her husband was in Spain on a deal, and so he was just talking about how they take siestas every afternoon. That's part of their culture, and you just think, oh my gosh, we are in such a hard-driven culture.
Yeah.
So I think it would, if I lived in Spain, would it be easier to do some of these things? Yes. I mean, I'd still have to do them. But in our culture, we have to be very intentional about doing these things, or we're just going to get swept away in this culture that says you got to keep working and do more and those kind of things.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. I think COVID slowed us all down a little bit enough to see there's value in that. Like you were saying, that God shows us things in that. And I see people trying to be more intentional with it. So is it as big a problem as it was before COVID? I don't know, but at least I think we're aware of some things that maybe we weren't before COVID. And I'm always trying to look at some of the good things that came out of COVID, because there's so many negative things that came out of COVID for us too. But I think everything we go through, God teaches us and has us learn things.
Yeah.
And I think that certainly could be one of them.
Yeah. And especially if we're doing what you told us to do just now, which is like to take the time to evaluate. You can learn a lot more if you're like actively participating. So I think that's a great encouragement to do that.
Yeah. And I think, just if someone wants to know how, just set aside a morning and you think, well, I get that. Well, you can. I mean, you really can. Or at night, whenever it is, and just sit down with pencil and paper and pray and ask God to guide you and just think through all of this. And I think God will help you. I think you'll find some things that you can do that will make a difference for you and your family.
I did that last week. I took a half day Friday and got alone in a quiet place. And I wrote down, I was reflecting on the past year, but also wrote down what worked, what do I want to do more of, what didn't work, what do I want to do less of. And goodness, I just had a lot of surprises in there. Let me tell you that. I was so surprised by some of the things that God showed me, and it was so helpful. And I just came back starry-eyed, because I was like, Brian, you will not believe this. It was incredible. So
that's so cool.
Just be encouraged that, when you're seeking those answers, God wants you to live in health. He wants you to thrive.
Yep.
He's going to show you that stuff. So it's really worth taking a little time to do.
Yeah. And I don't think you'll ever regret taking that time out, like you're talking about, because God, I think, is going to show up.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So, I have to pry myself away from that topic because I'm very, very into that right now. But I think too, a couple more, like you talked about using tech mindfully. One thing, Christina, our COO here at Awesome Marriage, is a master of efficiency and always helps us be more productive and is just really good at that. But a couple of things she's taught me about are using a really good app. We use an app called Todoist, or I do, and I know she does, which is just a great to-do list app. And it helps you prioritize and put everything in order of how it needs to be done. So that's a very good, did I check off my major things? Maybe a couple things have to roll over to tomorrow. But the one thing I love about using an app is I can't lose it the way I lose a list that I write down on paper, which I always do. But another thing she taught me about was, I know she didn't invent this, but about just only checking your email at certain times of the day. So there's nothing less productive than answering every single email as it comes in, whether it's 9 a.m. or 5 p.m. It can wait a couple hours, because if you're constantly stopping to go, back and forth between email and tasks, you're not going to get a lot done. So those are a couple small practical things.
That absolutely. I think that's so good, because you're right. You think about the time, if you're focusing on something, you see the email come in, you stop, you answer, and then you got to get back to where you were. And that's just, that's why I do the same thing. There's times I just don't. And I've never had anything that was where I thought, oh, I should have been there earlier,
Yeah. Well, and it's, honestly, it's like helps with the brain space too, because it's like when I'm answering, I can really pay attention to what I'm saying
Yes.
instead of just a half brain.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's see. What about, okay, so one other thing you've mentioned in the past was just embracing imperfection in this. So will you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I think that I guess it's because I've learned a lot through that I don't have to be perfect, and that there is when I do, there's frustrations that come, and it can be unproductive. Um, so I think for me, just knowing that I don't have to be perfect in everything. I want, it's that balance for me between I want, like everything we do at Awesome Marriage, everything I do in the counseling, everything, I want it to be excellent. But I'm also not going to be perfect in everything I go. And so I think for me, it's more like I know I'm putting in the effort. I know that I want to do my best. I know I pray about that. And if it doesn't always come out perfect, okay. It's not like I was just, sitting around eating bonbons and
Yeah.
watching Netflix or something,
Yeah.
and so I think learning to embrace that and also know that we have a God that's bigger than my mistakes. God is bigger than my imperfections. And if I really think the world is dependent on me being perfect, then I've got a problem because it doesn't.
Yeah.
And it does on him and not on me. And I'm certainly want to be used by him, but he knows I'm not perfect. And I know that he is.
There's our pro quote right there. That's what we're putting on the internet. That's a good one. Preaching at us here. No, that's so good. That's so good. Because I think the idea of balance, it's like you don't just get balanced and stay balanced forever. It's a constant work in progress. So I think one source of frustration might be the fact that like I felt like I had it for that one day and then it just kind of, something went wrong and, I had to go get the oil change and everything fell out of place. But I would just really, I love that point that you made because everything's always changing. And, like your responsibilities might change, your industry might change, your season of life will change, your family season will change, your health, all these things. There's so much we can't control. So perfection is not on our side. It's our enemy, really, to living well.
Absolutely. And we can get stuck there. And I think that's where we get in problem. I think we can all get there. It's just like anything. It just don't get stuck there. Realize that and come out. And just through prayer, I think God can help you see those things.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I know. I used to really try to spend a lot of time like crafting a perfect plan for things. And I spent so much time planning that then in the execution, I was already exhausted. I was like, this is too much. And it was just not realistic. And so I really learned that like doing something like pretty good is a lot better than a perfect plan that you completely fail to execute.
Absolutely. And I think, you can, we use rating systems all the time. You can rate too, because, if I'm doing something and it only affects me, it's not that big a deal. And I just say, well, this is a 3. I'm not going to, but if it's a 10, then I'm going to put my best in it. And sometimes that's helped because everything's not a 10.
Right.
No, it really isn't. And I think sometimes I could treat it that way, that everything was. And so then I'm really using a lot of energy on things that in the big picture aren't as important.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've mentioned a few of these, but will you give us a couple more special considerations for those who work from home?
I think it is challenging. I think some people, we have my assistant for the counseling center, her husband's an introvert. And of course, was in love with COVID because of that, because, he worked from home for a while. And so I think some of us, I think it's just, that's what we talked about. How do you end your workday? When do you start? When do you stop? I think that's something I've seen a couple of people struggle with. Some people are too perfectionistic. And so it's like, I got to start at 7:30. I got to quit at this time. Other people are just like, oh, I'm home. I can sleep in. And then all of a sudden you have a day and you haven't done anything. And so I think really, what are you doing with your time? How are you? I think there's got to be some structure around it. Just like if you were going to an office or a job site, clocking in or, those kind of things. I think the apps, help, like you were saying, to do this is good. I use Notion. It adds some other things that I like in it, but they're both good. And there's probably others. I think too, having some breaks.
Mm-hmm.
I could get in my office and really just not walk out for 8 hours sometimes
Mm-hmm.
because I'm getting involved or something. And so when you're working from home, I think you've got to take care of yourself too. And so I've got to take time to get some to eat. I got to take time to
Mm-hmm.
sometimes just get and walk outside or, just take a short break. I think that helps. Um, and then I think when you're at home alone working, that there are stresses and things that you don't have coworkers as easily to share those things with.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you do that? Do you jump on a Zoom call with a coworker? Do you keep that as a part? Do you share it with your spouse? How do you handle those stresses so they don't pile up on you?
Mm-hmm.
Because they can. And if you're
Mm-hmm.
not working through them, and so I think making sure take the time probably each day. Okay, do I have any stresses here?
Mm-hmm.
What do I need to talk to somebody about this? Do I need to get some
Mm-hmm.
input from somebody else? Am I on the right track with this? And making sure you do that.
Yeah.
Finding someone else at work that understands your work and that cares about you to jump on a call with
Mm-hmm.
could be really helpful. And
Mm-hmm.
caution, make sure it's somebody of the same sex
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because you're
Yeah.
talking about things there that can connect you with someone.
Yeah.
And that I've just seen too many inappropriate relationships start with something as innocent as that. And so
Mm-hmm.
I always want to say that part of it, that if you're going to find someone to walk through those things with you, you're going to jump on a call every day with, make sure it's somebody of the same sex.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you've seen it over and over,
Oh yeah. It's just
unfortunately.
so easy. And it's not
Mm-hmm.
anybody's intent, but a lot of times it's not anybody's intent going into it, but all of a sudden
Mm-hmm.
this person really cares and they're listening
Yeah.
and you start having feelings for somebody. So you don't want to go
Mm-hmm.
there.
Yeah, totally.
So I think just kind of organizing your time, um, focusing in an app, something like that can help you focus. Um, and then how do you handle the stress? How do you handle those
Mm-hmm.
things? I think those are things that are really important. Things that I see from people working from home. I see people that have loved working from home. It's been a
Mm-hmm.
blessing for so many. I think a lot of, and I think if you got kids at home, you may want to speak to that. That's another thing you've got to consider. How do you work
Mm-hmm.
from home like you do?
Mm-hmm.
And kids are older now,
Mm-hmm.
but I can remember when you and I first talked, they were young, they were everywhere and stuff like
They
that.
were, and they were homeschooled. They were always there.
Yeah, yeah. So anything that you had in from that standpoint, because I think there's probably moms that and maybe some dads that have to deal with that too.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and we're going to do an episode also about balancing this
Right.
in the home, and that some of this obviously is going to overlap. But I think for me, just being realistic about when is a good time to work, when is not, how much can I actually get done in a day. And so I think for me, some of the things I really held myself to, like you're saying, rate things out of 1 to 10, right? And so I work part time. I've worked part time for years. But still, I have to acknowledge that that's work and not act like I
Mm-hmm.
am 100% full time stay at home mom, because I was still expecting myself to be able to do every single thing that I could do if I didn't work while working. And that's not realistic. And so there's something about a lot of us that we just want to have these expectations for ourselves that aren't realistic. And I guess I've learned a lot about it because I ended up making that Bible study course we did for Online Women's Bible Study, all about this
Yeah.
topic of expectations, because just it's funny when you finally realize, you're like, why did I think I could do all that? Why
Mm-hmm.
did I think that I could, I would never tell my friend she had to make, dinner from scratch every night when she does homeschools and has a job too. Like, it just doesn't make sense. But I think prioritizing things appropriately and not trying to make everything a level 10. But also, when you're working, the most helpful thing to me is just focus. Let's do one thing at a
Yeah.
time. Don't try to do two things at once. It's not really going to get you anywhere. So whatever it takes to be able to have the appropriate level of focus, the appropriate workload, and also just knowing, like, these things will change, like the seasons will change, they'll shift. And so being able to work with the transition instead of just like totally freak out every time, which is kind of what I want to do, is it helps if you can kind of just get used to things changing, because they will. Like the summertime, kids will be home all the time again. We have to figure out a new system.
Right.
So we do.
Yeah. No, that's good. And I think it just again, it's addressing the problem or the issue
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and figuring out what works. And I think you're
Yes.
right. seasons change, and so there may be some adjustments. As kids get older, most of the time that gets a little easier because they don't need you as much as they did. They can go to the bathroom by themselves, and they can get something to eat by themselves, and so things like that change. And I think like what you were talking about, then realizing each is a season with our kids, and this one may be more demanding than the other one, but it ends at some point.
Yeah, well, so that's a great amount of practical advice for our listeners. And I think one thing, just as we're on this topic, is just this is what it was. You just mentioned that, like, if something's a problem, let's figure out how to work with it. I think that for a lot of us, we look around and everyone's struggling with this, so we just think this is normal. But I think if something in this conversation today has resonated with you, it's okay to acknowledge that you want things to go better. We don't have to stay in these unsustainable rhythms.
That's really good. And I'm glad you brought that up. And I think too, we're talking about the workplace. If you make some changes and the stresses and the job demands are still more than you want, maybe it's time to look at a different position, a different job. And I think that's always, I don't think that would, unless you're being abused or something at work, I wouldn't just do that, because you can jump from job to job to job, and that's usually not the best situation. But if your priorities, I had a guy do this once. He had a really good job, but man, he was not seeing his kids and family. He was tired of missing ball games and dance recitals and all that kind of stuff. And so he gave his boss notice and went to a different job. Made less money, but they talked about that. They valued his time with family more than they did that extra income. And so they were willing to make some sacrifices so he could be there. And so I haven't talked to him since then, but my thought is that he wouldn't change that allowed him to do the things with his wife and family that he really desired, and that he valued that.
That's good. That's good. I mean, we don't have to always be more all the time.
Right. If you go through the process things we've talked about and you're trying and you're not getting anywhere, then maybe it's time to look at, okay, what about my workplace? It is, if things are not flexible there, if I can't work things there, maybe it's time to look for something else.
That is so good. And you know what it reminds me of? I've referenced my granddad on here before because he was a pastor and a Christian counselor, and he's passed away now, but he was about 94 when we had this conversation. We were so curious. We're like, what is one thing in the world that you wish you could change? And he said, without hesitation, I do not like seeing people spending years in careers that they don't love. And I thought, man, I don't know what I thought he was going to say. But I was like, okay. He was like, people should be doing things that they enjoy with their life. And so I would like to, submit that as a piece of evidence here, because I would not take his opinion lightly.
That's really cool. And I think there's so much truth in that. God gave us gifts and abilities. And if we're using those, I think we're usually going to be pretty happy and content in the work that we're doing. And if we're not, we probably aren't. It's what is it, round peg, square hole, or all that kind of stuff. Yeah. It just doesn't fit right. You can do it, but what's it doing to you?
Yeah. Yeah. And you might be challenged, but in a way that is growing you, not in a way that's killing you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we've covered a lot today, and this has been a really helpful conversation. Do you have a final piece of advice for our listeners today?
Well, I guess anytime we do something like this, I would hope that people would kind of take a look at their life and how that, what is your balance in your life, in your workplace, and how's that going, and how's it affecting you? And is it just to take time to look at it and to put some prayer to it and ask God's guidance in some of these things. And do you need to make some changes? Do you need to say no more? Do you need to do some of the things that we talked about? Are you really, you knew you were so stressed and now you just got to admit it because you heard this. What do you do to relieve your stress? So again, I would encourage you to take some type of action step in an area that we've kind of touched that hit home with you today.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. I love it. It's so practical, but it's such a helpful process. So don't leave without taking something from today's episode. And we hope and pray this is helpful to you and your marriage today. Join us again next week as we'll be talking about mastering work-life balance in the home as it pertains to the mental load, the workload of caring for a home, and how you navigate that together as a team. So I can't wait to hear your thoughts on that, Dr. Kim. As always, thank you so much for joining us today on the Awesome Marriage Podcast. Have a great day and do something awesome for your marriage today.